I'm not sure I've ever had a question where somebody asks and they're like, I don't know if I'm going to answer that. I'm like, you may not like what I'm about to say, but let's go.
What's your social security number?
Oh, well, okay.
I'm just kidding.
Okay, hey, you call my bluff. You called it.
Well, Graham, thank you so much for joining me on Growing Up Fundie. I'm really excited to have you on this podcast. Your story is a roller coaster ride. It's a wild ride. I thought I knew what I was getting into when I emailed you, but you organized it beautifully, which I appreciated greatly. And the funny thing was, I didn't realize until just now that I'd never actually heard your voice before, but I felt like I heard your voice through your writing. It sounds like your voice sounds exactly like how I would have thought it sounded, having never heard it before, if that makes sense.
It absolutely does. And as someone who, at least at one point in time, fancied myself a bit of a writer, that's like a super compliment that a voice can come across in how I write. So as long as there's fewer ums, you knows, and uhs, I think we'll be good.
You have a wild story, and I would love to hear it from your perspective. Tell us a little bit about how you grew up. You went to, it sounds like a number of churches, but was there one denomination that you identified with more or claimed more than the rest?
So growing up, the church that I kind of came of age in, for lack of a better description, was a Christian and Missionary Alliance church. I grew up down in Florida, currently live in Maine, which is a much better place to live. Sorry, Florida.
It sounds like it. Yeah.
You're fine to visit, but we'll just leave that there. I grew up in a Christian home. Compared to some of the stories that others on your podcast have had, pretty run of the mill. Thankfully, I wouldn't say that I had even glancing experiences with anything cultish. So that's nice. Yeah.
That's always a pleasant surprise on this podcast.
Right. Definitely not all sunshine and rainbows, but it was, I believe I was, late elementary, early middle school. My family started attending this Christian and Missionary Alliance church, and that's where we were going until we ended up moving right before high school. And actually, now that I think about it, the church that we ended up going to after that was also an Alliance church.
Interesting, because I've never even heard of that before, and you've been to two.
Yeah, I know, right? It's kind of a fairly nondescript Protestant. It's Baptistic, not pugnaciously so.
Man, just throwing out all the $1 million words. Digging it.
Oh man, please stop me if I do. I love words. What can I say? There may be at least one moderately well-known Alliance pastor by the name of A.W. Tozer. He wrote a book called The Pursuit of God, right? I think. Oh God, I'm going to go with that. And
I can link it below.
And somebody can correct me in the comments. Growing up in a family, I mean, there was very devout, don't get me wrong, but wasn't necessarily wedded to a particular tradition apart from Protestantism.
Right.
We never kind of ventured outside that. But there was a Swedish American Baptist church that we were at for a while.
I saw that on the list too.
Yeah, they rebranded. Don't get me started. They rebranded some years ago to Converge, which is just like one of those, like, it's like the churches that have like the one name, like Status or something else, and you're just like, I don't even know what the hell that means. Like, just tell me what you are.
What would be an identifier that would set an Alliance church apart from just your run-of-the-mill Baptist church? Like, what was the one thing or two things they did that made them supposedly, in their opinion, different than just say like a Presbyterian church or something?
I mean, they put it right in the name, Christian and Missionary Alliance. Christian denominations are missional in some respect or
Yeah, that was
another.
my main thing, is like, what made them more allies of missionaries than other places?
Well, if you plant your flag, you can claim it. I want to say that the denomination was started at some point in like, the early 1900s, so you got that, you got that. It's not quite coming out of the second great awakening, but you definitely have that evangelistic fervor. And so, let's go reach the nations, as it were, to spread the white Christian gospel. But as a kid, it felt just like any other church I went, when
Yeah,
I visit friends' churches, except for the weird Pentecostal ones, which always kind of, I was like, oh, that's something, all right.
they're always laying hands on me.
Man, I mean, and as someone who's kind of like a high sensory sort of, like, people touching me is not super great. So we sort of traveled around. We had the Baptist church. I went to a Lutheran preschool. I was a Presbyterian kindergarten. We ended up at a Presbyterian church for a while. That would be, for those that care, the Presbyterian Church in America, which is,
I was gonna say,
definitely.
anyone listening to this cares, probably,
Yeah,
if I
you're
had to
probably
guess.
right. You're probably right. It wasn't the nice liberal, PC USA church. Not quite the fundamentalists of the Presbyterian world, but pretty darn close.
Why do you think that was? Why do you think your parents hopped around to so many different churches?
For the most part, it actually probably had a lot to do with my sister and I. I've got one sibling, a younger sister, and I don't really remember too many kids at like the Baptist church.
Right.
In
Yeah.
between that and the Alliance Church, there was a Presbyterian church, and I hated that one. They had a Christian school there, and so the kids were like super cliquey that like went there. So I hated going, especially they take you to Sunday school, and you got to like, be around these kids that think they're the cool kids, and you're like the odd duck out.
Right.
And to make it even worse, like the campus was like split ish. Like they had like the school was like down the street a little bit. So they like actually bused the kids for Sunday school. And so I got to ride the school bus like 5 days of the week already. And then you put me on a bus with these church kids that I'm like, no, I was always sick on Sunday for some reason. They were involved with a Bible study organization called Bible Study Fellowship. And I think their at least relational circles in kind of the Christian realm stemmed a lot from that. Allegiance to a singular church was sort of less important than to relationships. But even now, as you're saying that, I think the reason why we ended up at the Alliance Church was that we had family going there. Dude, you're bringing up stuff I haven't thought about, and there you go.
You just start like crying, you just like get in the fetal position. So you went to a bunch, like there's a whole list you sent me. You went to a bunch of different churches. We did
Mhm.
too when I was a kid, and my mom used to call us religion whores, and then she told us not to repeat that. And now as an adult, I'm like, oh, moving around that much, did you feel like you believed in God and like God was real and he had a presence in your life? Or was it more like I just want to find a Sunday school where I don't feel like the odd one out?
As a younger kid, it was a lot of just, this is what we do as a family.
Hmm.
Not to say I wasn't like devout, as it were, but for like how devout really can, like an elementary school kid be.
Right.
I probably shouldn't say that, because there are some, I would assume, that are probably, they're out there 4 years old,
Are they devout or are they indoctrinated?
well, I guess you're probably gonna be more right with the latter.
I'm just
Uh,
asking. Maybe they can be both.
for the majority of my life, as much as I, can remember, I was devout. Yeah. Obviously, growing up in at least modern American evangelicalism, there's very much here are the markers of you being devout. Do you have your quiet time? Do you read your Bible? Check the boxes. And I always like had a hard
Devotionals.
time. Yeah. I always had a hard time checking the boxes. So of course, you always struggle with the self-doubt of like, oh my God, do I really believe this? Do I really take this seriously? Like, am I just like, just getting by the skin of my teeth?
Like, I remember when I was a kid, I was afraid of the rapture because of everyone else. Like, it never occurred to me that I would not get raptured. I just assumed I would be one of the raptured ones. But I'm like, but what about everybody else stuck down here who's imperfect?
That's right. I love all these people. I know I'm going to make it.
So you were religious for a while. Like, you studied, or did you study at a religious college? I know you eventually became a pastor and you worked in the music part of the music department, right? Like a
So
worship leader.
the Cliff Notes version, which I'm sure we'll probably suss out a little bit more
Mhm.
as we go, is probably the sort of the turning point, in that kind of like, am I really going to take this seriously and sort of fashion my life around this
Right.
identity? I grew up going to the summer camp, kind of in the counselor training program. If I'm going to be a counselor to these kids, I got to take this stuff seriously because
Yeah.
I at least had the wherewithal to say like, if you're gonna like preach this thing, you better be on board with it too. Like, don't be a hypocrite, right?
Right.
You
You gotta
can
live it.
you
Yeah.
can suck at living it, but you got to at least try to live it, right?
Yeah.
In high school, was really involved with the church youth group. Was a leader. Kind of did some music stuff there. When I went to college, I went to the University of Florida because my former youth pastor had gone on staff with Campus Crusade for Christ. And
Which,
so
to anybody unfamiliar, how would you describe that?
I would describe Campus Crusade for Christ. And I know they've rebranded Crew. Quite honestly, that one was just everyone called it Crew because Campus Crusade for Christ is a terrible name. It's so long. It's just like, oh my God. I'm like, I have a hard time not shortening 2-syllable names to one
Right.
nickname, so
Right. And also
um,
crusade is just like a real heavy word.
we didn't think that back then. Uh,
Like,
Which isn't that long. I'm not that old.
I've just never had anyone from an organization with the word crusade in the name, like, show me a great time. It's just all I'm saying.
uh, but I was like super involved there. I was a Bible study leader again, involved with the music. I got pretty involved with the church that I was going to while in college. I had this thing where I would always sit on the front row, and not because like I felt like you if you sit on the front row you're more holy, but of course being in college you're staying up till God only knows what time. And I was like, if I sit on the front row, I know I won't fall asleep because like the
Is that
social
true? Did it
pressure.
actually work?
Right. Oh yeah, it does. Because
Wow.
like, I mean, if you're on the front row, I mean, the pastor's like right there. And it's like, if I fall asleep, there's no like getting out of this. Like he's going to be looking at me the entire time. So, I guilted myself into staying awake, which is exactly what God wants from you. So I was really involved with Crusade. I Oh my God, that's exactly what we called it. We didn't call it Crew, we called it Crusade. It was like take the worst word out of the name and pick that one.
That's true. I didn't even think about that.
See, this is almost half the reason why I sent it in because I'm like, I have such like a terrible like memory that I have to like talk through things to actually remember stuff. And so like I'm
And
like,
I am a nosy person, so it's a great combination.
and I am always willing to answer a question. I'm not sure I've ever had a question where somebody asks and they're like, I don't know if I'm going to answer that. I'm like, you may not like what I'm about to say, but let's go.
What's your social security number?
Oh,
I'm
well,
sorry.
okay.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Just kidding.
Okay, hey, you call my bluff. You called it. So there we go. Um, I mean, so heavily involved in Crusade that I considered at one point going on staff with them after graduation.
Wow.
Was
That's
actually
intense.
I was if I had sort of the one like most charismatic quote unquote experience in my life, and hearing the voice of God had to do with the decision of what do I do after graduation, and going on staff was one of those options. Surprise, surprise, I decided that was the right thing to do. Also, surprise, surprise, support raising sucks. it's expensive to employ people, right?
Yes.
It may sound like I'm trying to justify, but I'm mostly just trying to understand. If you believe that time is short and you need to get the message out to as many people as possible as quickly as possible, you want to try to offload, organizationally speaking, the hardest parts of that. The unfortunate thing is you offload it onto the very people that are supposed to be like doing your job for you. It was during that kind of that time. I got married right out of college.
Yeah. And you were pretty young at that point, right? Like 2021.
I was, let's see, we got married in '03. So I was 22. I would not recommend it. I'm not saying I love my wife, don't get me wrong. But we are very different people than we were 20,
Yes.
almost 20 years ago now, I guess. Yeah, '03. Yeah, it'll be 20 years this year.
Wow.
That part of the story may come up at some point later down the road. Just to say, if you can't rent a car, you probably shouldn't be getting married. Um, it's just my opinion. I'm
Yep.
not making any declarations, but lived experience says maybe wait a little bit.
Yeah.
But so got married right out of college. Was raising support to do at least a 1-year internship with Crusade. I, I've always been a bit of a nerd, bit of a brainiac. So there was kind of this thought in the back of my head, like maybe someday I'll go to seminary, get a theological degree, to not even for the credential. Like I'm not really huge on titles or anything like that, but it's just like if I can know more about something, especially if it's like this really important thing to not only my identity, but to the fate of the world. I should probably do all that I can to understand it as well as possible, right? And in the whole support raising process, people would just be like, "Oh, why don't you go to seminary? Why don't you go to seminary?" And it was one of those like refrains that back then I was like, "Oh, I mean, maybe God's trying to tell me something." Prayed about it, and I was like, "Okay, well, here's what we'll do. I'll apply to seminary, and if I get in, that'll be God's sign." And I always say, if I knew then what I know now about seminary application processes, I'm thinking it's grad school, right? Grad school is hard to get into. No, no, it's not. If you can pay and you've got moderately decent grades, they'll accept just about anybody. When you're ignorant, that's you don't know that, and it was a sign. So with zero money in our pockets, we moved across state and went to seminary in Orlando.
And did your wife also go to seminary, or did she just do something different?
Nope, she's a good bit younger than I am. That's another fun part of our story. And so had done a year of Bible college, but that was it. So classic classic patriarchal male story. It's she gets a job and supports us while I'm in school.
I mean, but she's being a good biblical wife.
That's what we thought.
Yeah. And so there's a Bible college in Maine?
Not in Maine. Well,
Okay.
there used to be. There used to be a seminary up north in one of the cities, Bangor, and it
Oh,
was
yeah.
pretty liberal, but it closed down a number of years ago. But this was we were living in Florida at the time.
Got it.
She had gone to Bible college in Florida because I was still in. I was a senior in at UF, and she was a freshman. Well, it's a 1-year program, but she was doing that year of Bible college, and then we got married. So um, she worked after 1 year. We realized that was completely untenable to be one income. So I crammed a 3-year degree into 4. Graduated with my master's of divinity degree.
That's no small thing, though. That's
It
tough to do.
it is it is a good bit of work. It's in some respect it's almost like a second undergrad, because you have like with other masters, you've got sort of your undergraduate level base, and then you build on top of that. But I mean, I was a business major in college. Like I didn't have any. Uh,
That's funny. I didn't know that. That's funny.
yeah, I mean, it was funny. It was I went in
To
as
go from business to theology.
it's about selling things, I guess. I was working at the time at an organization that was producing online seminary curriculum. I was in the content development division, writing
Interesting.
lessons. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
cool.
It was really fun. I mean, it was writing, right? And I've already said that I enjoy turning a phrase, and so if you can mix two passions, it was a great place to be. But I had my heart set on being a pastor, and I also had my heart set on not living in Florida for the rest of my life. So I
That I
was
also don't blame you for, to be
yeah.
honest. No offense.
Mhm. I was looking for work and ended up getting a position at a Evangelical Presbyterian church. That's an actual name, not just a description. The EPC in New Hampshire. So we were
Oh,
able
that's
to,
cool.
yeah, we were able to move in the EPC. I mean, they're more liberal than the PCA because they ordain women.
Wow, I'm
Oh, I know,
shocked that
right?
they're considered liberal, but that I mean, they ordain women. That's shocking too.
Right, right.
Anybody who's got the name evangelical in their title and ordains women, it's like, whoa. Have you
Whoa,
read the Bible?
whoa.
Like, excuse me. You clearly don't read the Bible here. Thank you.
Yeah, so I was a youth pastor for a couple of years.
So then how did
Um,
it go south from there? Or up, depending on how you look at it?
well, see, that's a fun story.
Well, I guess I should ask first.
Yeah.
Were you enjoying the process or were you doing it because you felt like you had to as a Christian?
No, that's a really good question. I had a real desire to use what I knew to help people. There was towards the end of seminary, I did consider going on for further studies, applied to a couple of doctoral programs. That, however, is much more difficult to get into. I was doing it because I wanted to. Now, I didn't really ever see myself as the youth pastor type, because there's a bit of a stereotype. Um,
Yes. You're telling me you didn't own a leather jacket and a puka shell necklace and you're from Florida?
there was a short number of months in my life where I did have a soul patch.
Got to be glued in your hair?
It was the hair in college was very long.
There you go.
It was probably mid arm length at its longest. That was mostly because you know how college kids think. I had a really bad haircut my freshman year. Said I'm never going to do that again, and I just like I don't have a job. I don't have a girlfriend. Nobody cares what I look like, so we'll just see what happens.
And then you got married. So
And
clearly
then
it
I got
worked.
married.
Growing your
Well,
hair out is the trick.
but one of the things that I was thinking as the opportunity came up, I applied for it, and I was like, okay, what's the one thing I didn't want to do was to be the person that uses like this uh, youth pastor position as like an apprenticeship sort of thing, where it's like I'm doing this not because I really want to like do this with you guys, but I want to like get my foot in the door and then climb the
Yeah.
ladder, as it were. I said to myself, I'm like, you can't take this job unless the kids are your people, right? Like they can't be pawns
Yeah.
in your career aspirations. But I think that might have been, in some respect, the seedbed for not necessarily getting fired. Um, See, there are two versions of the story I can tell. The one I believed back then, and then the one that I believe now.
Let me get my tea.
Um,
Hold on.
you're
Okay, I'm ready.
like, all right, I'm ready. I got the tea. Coming into the job, I've got people sort of giving me the rundown. Say, so here are the kids, and here are X, Y, and Z, and these are these kids kind of have some problems, and these are the good kids. And like labeling, just like fuck that. I'm gonna let these kids be who they are, and
Yeah.
let them tell me about it. And surprise, surprise, the kids that were the problem kids were simply living into the expectations that people were putting onto them. Because
You mean the Calvinist way of doing things didn't work right? Predetermining who they were going to be before they had a chance to change it isn't accurate and resourceful?
you know,
I am utterly shocked.
as am I. This system is so perfectly attuned. Why doesn't it work?
Allowing people to
Um,
grow and change? Boo.
right.
No way.
In that, like I really loved these kids. I mean, they were fantastic kids. The real rub to it, I think, started when I would teach them just the same way I'd teach adults. Right. I'm trying to do, like these, really, in-depth sort of biblical theological understandings of like the whole scriptures and run and like doing it, not just in like absolutely not in a lecture format, but trying to like think creatively, so how do we do this, so we have like poetic readings of certain passages, and just like really trying to engage
Yeah.
um mind, body, heart, right? Or looking at it like from a multiple intelligence sort of way of being, some people are auditory learners, some people are
Yep.
visual learners, some people are kinesthetic learners. So in order to reach to reach everyone, you've got to think creatively and engage and engage all the methodologies, right? And I wouldn't like water anything down. It's not just like I'm not just going to tell these kids read your Bibles and pray, right? Like, because
Right.
that's what good Christians do. I'm like, because quite honestly, even in this job, I'm still having a hard time doing that. Understand more than just the surface level of things, and ask hard questions about life and about beliefs and all these sorts of things. And I'd say, listen, I'll answer any questions you got, but I'm not like I don't take the place of your parents, right? And so if your parents are you know are Christians, like these are questions, like if you've got questions, go to them, ask them, see what their opinions are, right? If not, I'll answer anything you want. I mean, kids actually took, I mean, again, surprise, surprise. Kids listen to what people tell them, and they're like, I believe this guy really cares about me. So I'm going to take what he says seriously, and I'm going to go talk to my parents, and putting them in sort of uncomfortable positions of having to say, I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know. When I think a lot of times, you know, unless you have like a real like oh my god, what's the opposite of fixed mindset? Growth mindset. Of just like being like, that's a good question. Right.
Yeah. See, like, I feel like the way it should be is your kid asks you a question you don't have the answer to, and you're like, that's a really good question. Let's look into that together because I don't actually know. And then
Right.
foster that environment where they feel like they can, you can learn. I feel like a lot of religions, especially in the United States, I feel like pressure parents to be the leaders of the household and also correct about everything.
Everything.
When in reality, I think your children would respect you so much more and think you're smarter than anyone else they've ever met if you are willing to say, like, "I don't know, let's look that up. I don't know, what do you think? What are your thoughts on that? What does your teacher say? Let's talk about it." But
Right.
people take not knowing something as ignorance, and then they get offended by it, and then they shut down the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. You're absolutely right, I think. And I think about this a lot. I think at least my current thought about it is when you have something that is so like when something touches identity, right? Like this is my identity. I am this, in this case, Christian. You can pick whatever you want. But if you have this thing about I am this, and then somebody says, well, what does this have to say about that? And you're like, I don't know. It now means I'm a bad this,
Yes, exactly.
right?
Exactly.
Um, which isn't true at all, but I think it's what we're fed, like maybe fed, maybe there's a bit of just kind of the natural human like desire to like look good. I don't know if that's part of just like the social fabric of humanity that, I want
I
to
think
fit in. I want to not look bad.
I think it's a confidence thing.
Yeah.
I think um I've noticed that a lot of primarily because my scope is American Christianity,
Right.
I've noticed that a lot of Christian churches in the United States, they do a lot of everything's your fault. You need to pray harder. You need to learn more. You need to research. You need to foster your relation. They do a lot of putting everything on you.
Hmm.
And I think what that does is that makes people very self-conscious. It makes them worry that they are sticking out among the fold. So they're like, do I look right on Sunday? Am I sitting in the proper pew? Do people know that I missed last week? Like you're always worried about what other people are thinking of you. So whereas somebody like you or I, when somebody asks us a question, we're like, that's a good question. I have no idea. I wonder what that is, because we're not worried about proving to anyone anything when all you have is the fact that you're a parent and you want your kid to respect you, and that's your whole identity. That's it, and you go to work 9 to 5 and that's it. If you can't even do that to 100% in your mind, you're made to be a fool. So if you're
Yeah.
like, I'm the head of this household, God says I lead this family, and your kid asks you a question and you don't know the answer, you like spiral. And then you probably end up like punishing your kid somehow for like, don't be nosy. You like stop asking questions like that.
Right. Just believe it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. I think so. Because, um, getting back to the story, after about a year and a half or so, give or take, um, I was kind of like in a sort of a rough place. I'm like, is this what I'm supposed to be doing? Things aren't like, I'm just getting pushback from people, all this sort of stuff. And then like the church leadership decided to like survey the parents to see what they thought about, like how things were going with the youth group, which,
Jeez.
yeah. Uh,
Which means it was probably actually being really effective and encouraging inquisitive thought, and parents were sick of that shit.
so as part of the survey, there's the classic question of, what's the most important thing? Like, what do you want? Like, what do you want this youth group to be for your kid? Like, what's the most important thing? And it ended up being something like a fun place for them to go to. Like,
Yeah.
and I'm like,
Something simple.
yeah, like I think it was like number 3, number 4, something. It was significant enough where I'm like, Jesus is down there. Uh,
Because I
I'm
thought, isn't he supposed to be here and then husband and then wife and then child? Isn't he supposed to be like the top?
yeah, I'm like, you know, I'll play a game or two because that's sort of that's kind of the thing you do with youth group. And
That's
don't get me
sad
wrong, I
though.
mean, I love playing games with the best of them, um, but I'm like the number one thing is like a fun place for my kid to go to, and the learning about God thing is like further down the list. And I looked at the pastor. I'm like, I think we have a fundamental difference of priorities here. Um, and
That's really sad.
it is. Now, the senior pastor, it as a human being, he is a wonderful human being. Um, he's very kind-hearted. Um, he's not someone who micromanages or demeans or anything like that. Um, but I think he also is very much, I hate to say politician because that has just negative connotations,
Like
but
HR, more like.
he's someone who wants to include the most amount of people and make everyone feel happy. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. But sometimes, doing the right thing means, upsetting people.
Right.
And so if you want me, there's a digression there of some Pentecostal Presbyterian action, like down in North Carolina, that we can get into. But the story I told myself then was, after prayer, I feel like, God's telling me to move on. The story I tell now is I think I was manipulated into leaving. Now, I don't hate the fact that I, left, because it changed kind of the trajectory of my life, and that's been for the better. And
But it's still like a salty memory.
it is a salty memory, and it was one of those definitely things where it was hard. It was one of those, like, again, identity, right? Like, this is my identity. This is who I am. Not necessarily like this particular job, right? Like, this one employment opportunity. But definitely like, okay, so I am not a pastor anymore. What do I do?
Like,
Um,
who even am I at this
yeah,
point?
exactly. Who am I? Um, there was all kinds of things that I did to try to make ends meet, because at this point we had our first child, a son, and he was 2.
Wow.
We were pregnant with our second when I uh, got let go. Yeah, to the church's credit, they kept us on their insurance policy until after my second son was born.
Wow.
So
That's actually impressive.
so this is why, like, I don't hold like animosity towards them, because
Yeah.
I truly think that they were also attempting to do the best that they could.
But it
I
sounds like they could have stood up for you a little bit more.
think so.
And I wonder if that's why you got benefits afterward, because they knew they weren't doing the right thing, and you knew they weren't doing the right thing, but they still wanted to preserve that tie.
Yeah, you probably called me on yeah. I I very much justify people's actions towards me a lot. There's probably some childhood trauma in that.
Well,
Uh,
you never wanna call it what it is. That's never good. You know what I
right.
mean?
Yeah, you always wanna believe the best in people.
Benefit of the doubt, right?
Right, exactly. I'm not that. I don't know what they were thinking. Um, but so I did do some interim work at another church in town as their worship pastor, just to try and make ends meet. It happened to be that uh, their worship pastor had an affair and had to leave, so that was an interesting thing to
Wow.
step into. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But it's also fun when you're doing the interim thing and you think, oh man, I could get this job, and then they're like, no, we don't want you. That's
Oh,
fine.
yeah. Yep.
Uh,
It's also interesting that you were like, "I don't wanna use these kids as a stepping stone to greater things. I need to make sure that I, like, put myself into it," and then you put yourself into it, and they're like, "Not like that."
Not like that. No. It's like, no, 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 no. What we really want is you to just make us feel good. Oh, there was also, I almost forgot this part, but I think this is important, because it speaks not only to the whole Christian thing, but to just middle or upper middle class America. So it was a wealthy church, not like full of like crazy rich people, but certainly people that are well off. And so I'm talking to like high schoolers, and I'm saying, listen, it doesn't matter where you go to college, like seriously, unless you're going to be like a Supreme Court justice or some kind of like heart surgeon. Nobody gives a flying flip where you did your undergrad, right? Like if you want to go further, like get into a good graduate program, but at that point, you can probably get some pretty sick, scholarships and that kind of thing. But like, don't indebt yourself for the rest of your life for your undergraduate degree. Like,
For
it
like the
does.
name, the certificate.
Right. Like, I mean, and I said, I'm like, listen, my diploma is still in the tube they mailed it to me in. And this is, and it still is. I mean, this was back, 2010, I think. Yeah. 2011, something like that. And another 10 years beyond that, and it's still in that tube. Nobody cares. I mean, sure, I'm repping the shirt right now. But that just happened to be because it was, on the top of the laundry pile. Um, but, and I think that rubbed parents the wrong way because these kids, they were getting into these, some were going to Ivy League schools, some were going to like hoity-toity, Christian colleges. Like it was, just north of Massachusetts. So, Gordon College is a big Christian college there, and it's not cheap. I mean,
No.
it's at least at the time, $50,000 a year. Like for your undergraduate degree, like this is
That's like what I paid for my whole degree, if even that much. If
Oh my
even that
God.
much.
No, I know. I got a full ride scholarship
Mhm.
to college, but that's
Same.
mostly because I did halfway decent on my SATs. And Florida had this program where they were like losing all kinds of people, and I realize now that it was funded by the state lottery, so there's probably some like uh, questionable taxes on the poor that paid for my
Same. I got the Arkansas lottery scholarship.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I
I
think
think I paid like 20 maybe total, and that's because I lived in an apartment. Otherwise, it would have been free.
yeah,
Something like that. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, it was. I was dumb and I took a loan my first semester, so I graduated college with like $2,000 worth of debt, and and that's just completely unheard of now. I
Right.
think at least, but yeah, no, I was just like, no, it doesn't matter where you go, and parents are like, what are you telling our kids? It doesn't. I'm like, because it doesn't, right? Because here's the thing. You're saying you want them to go to the right school. And what does the right school mean? It's the one where, you think that upon graduation, they'll get the right job. And what does the right job mean? The one that pays well, the one that gives them power, right? So it all comes down to money, power, and influence,
Mhm.
right? And I, quite honestly, I was just like, I don't see anything about Christianity in that matrix, right? Because like
Right.
if we say that we follow Jesus, um, did Jesus care about money? No. Foxes have their holes, birds have their nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. Dude was an itinerant preacher, right? He lived off the benefaction of others. Power. And Jesus really care about power? No, he actually spoke truth to power, and that's what got him murdered. Uh, maybe influence, but not personal influence, right? So I'm just going to call it what it is. Um, this is the American dream, and not that there's anything wrong with the American dream. Don't get me wrong about that. Um, I don't know, well, maybe there is, but
I could name a few things.
you see, the problem is every time I say like, not that there's, and it's like, wait, no, there actually is something wrong with that. But there certainly isn't anything Christian about it. Um,
Right.
so maybe
And
maybe
was
that
it
had something to get me fired out of it.
was it that incident specifically that made you be like, maybe none of this is for me? Or had you been kind of thinking that up until then, or was that not even it?
That still wasn't even a thing. Still very devout in all of it. Um, and so devout that I'm like, okay, well, so how do I really, I really want to know what God wants me to do. So, what do I do? Well, so I read, not just like Bible, but yeah, I was like reading there was the pastor scholar who translated the Message, Eugene Peterson. He wrote about, well, there was a biography written about him. It might have been like a co-authorship, so it doesn't matter. You know, I was reading it, and this guy's just like, I mean, just like more humble than, you know, I could ever be in my entire life. I mean, I brag in my sleep, you know. And just like seeing like, okay, this is the kind of person that is like, it really is a pastor. It's the one who has like in a healthy way, no ego, right? Who is just, you know, willing to sort of pour themselves out. And, you know, I'm like, oh God, I'm like, so I'm like, oh, I gotta really like find this out. So I'm gonna fast. Like that's what people do in the Bible, right? Like I'm gonna fast. I'm gonna do this like 30-day fast, 40-day fast thing. So it was the classic, like, you know, broth and water kind of thing. Shave my head. Like it was the middle of the night. No, it was, yeah. I was
I can't judge because I shaved my head like 2 months ago, but not for that reason. Totally different. It was an accident.
Yeah, no, it was definitely like I'm not entirely sure if I can't remember if I had already started the fast or if it was like kind of a lack of food sort of thing, but it was definitely I was not sleeping, I was reading, and I like shaved it in the middle of the night, and when Becky woke up, she was like, "What did you do?" I'm like, I don't know, like my hair felt prideful, so I shaved it off.
And do you notice how like the exact same thing that religion touts as like signs of devotion, if the Bible isn't brought up at all, it's like a mental breakdown.
Right?
Like if I knew anybody else and they were like, I'm not going to eat for 30 days and I'm shaving off all my head, I'd be like, I really think you should talk to somebody. I really think you should talk to somebody. But when you're like, I'm fasting to like get
Mhm.
closer to God and I'm going to shave my head to like lessen my pride, it's like, oh, wow, I'm going to applaud you for that because that's pious.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, I mean, and I was trying to do it, man. I really wanted to do the right thing, right? You know, and not just like by God, but like
What even was the right thing?
well, that was part of the thing, right? Like
Mhm.
what is the thing to do? You know, it ended up I just career wise, I gotta at like literally sort of the last moment before severance ran out. I got a call from a friend from seminary actually who worked at this Bible software company, and he said, "Been approved to hire another person. Are you interested?" And I said, "Well, funny you should mention it. I am currently in the market. Uh, I've never done anything computer programming, but I can learn."
Yeah.
You know, and so in some respect that did kind of change the trajectory of
Yeah.
at least my employment, because that's
Mhm.
I'm now in IT at a small liberal arts college up here, so you
That's
know,
cool.
hey, pays the
Yeah.
bills, and I really enjoy it. um but yeah, so that is in that whole process, you know, I'm still trying to um, I'm still trying to be the best Christian I can be. Not in a in I don't think I don't think I've ever really had like a legalistic kind of you know, trajectory or so, but just like, you know, I just want to I want to be doing or pointing in the right direction at the very least, right? Um and I do think kind of alongside that, if for time's sake, I'll say that it was going to seminary that I think is sort of, if you want to say, the inciting incident to you know, my eventual deconversion, um,
Interesting.
because it's about critical thinking,
Yes.
right? And not that and not that I wasn't necessarily a critical thinker to begin with, but definitely was more apt to just accept what was being told me, and like having it be sort of the grounds, and then thinking like critically out of that rather than of that, right?
Right.
Um,
Interesting. I like the way you put that.
yeah, and so it was funny. It was a very conservative seminary. I mean, not like, again, not fundamentalist, but conservative Presbyterian seminary. But the if you go to a place that's accredited, the accreditation entity, always like does like these exit interview or questionnaires, right? And one of the questions on this was, upon graduation from this institution, do you feel like you are way more conservative, about the same, and then all the way down to like way more liberal, right? And I fill out way more liberal, even though at this point, like I'm still like, if there's a spectrum, I'm very still much like, I may not be like a literalist per se, uh, but like on all like the big issues, like I'm probably like, okay, you know, women can be pastors. Great. I mean, that's the extent of my liberalism,
You
right?
were liberal for your environment.
Yes, exactly. You know, um, but that was a move in the, for lack of a better metaphor, in the left direction.
Yeah.
Um, you know,
Baby steps.
that wouldn't have happened otherwise, right?
Yeah, totally.
Um, and and then also providing the tools to understand, okay, let's look at these commentaries and see what scholarship has to say, and let's not only look at writings from our tribe, as it were, but let's look at, say, these more critical scholars and what they have to say about things, and then trying to maybe not synthesize, but at least compare and contrast, and doing all these critical thinking activities, right?
Right.
And so it was, yeah, I really do think it was there that, I mean, apart from going to seminary, I probably would not be in the position that I am now.
Interesting. That's like the opposite of probably what they would want to happen.
Oh
But
yeah.
it's interesting that the institution that's trying to make you more religious is actually the one that taught you critical thinking might make you non-religious.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so once you began deconstructing, was this something that you felt like you had to kind of come out to your wife about, or were you both on that journey, or is she still religious?
So we, over the last number of years, we've definitely been, we're not on the same page in that regard. She is still, she's still spiritual. There definitely, I mean, she grew up, if somebody in this relationship grew up fundamentalist, it was absolutely her. She grew
Interesting.
up in a very like independent fundamentalist Baptist tradition. Oh yeah.
Wow. Like
Like we almost
IFB,
didn't get
straight
married
up?
because the Bible college she went to, like, uh some of the professors didn't really like me, because this, you know, I was this liberal guy who went to this state school, had long hair and a tattoo, and was a Calvinist. Oh God, you know, do you
That's
even believe the Bible?
I've never heard a human being accused of being too liberal because they were Calvinist. That's,
Well,
like,
when you,
wild shit to
yeah,
me.
oh
That
yeah,
shows me how hardcore that must have been.
oh it was
Like,
it was
whoa.
very hardcore, very
Because like, in
hardcore.
my mind, Calvinists are, like, peak Fundie, like, peak.
I mean, you, like anybody, or any group, they contain multitudes, so like
Oh, yeah, for sure.
but I always like to say, because there is a Presbyterian denomination called the Orthodox Presbyterian Church, and they are the indie fundies of, yeah, yeah,
You
you
said
wanna, yeah,
Orthodox?
Orthodox Presbyterian Church. You look that shit up, and
I think I've heard of it all, and then I always hear of a new one.
So one of my professors in seminary, he came out of that denomination, and the again, another split from the PCUSA Church, but this time back in the 30s. The sort of the guy who led the charge was this guy J. Gresham Machen, and so my professor he sees like just when you start a movement with like this sort of militaristic, not in like a we're like lining people up and doing drills kind of thing, but in like
Right.
a militant, like fundamentalist, like this, like our way is the right way kind of thing. Like that is it's going to be the tenor of the organization from start to finish, right? So he had this article that he wrote called Machen's Warrior Children, and I always laughed at it because it was just absolutely true. I mean, the just pugnacious is an apt term for these people. But yeah, so yeah, we almost didn't get married because I was this liberal Calvinist, and
How did you convince her, and then how did she convince people in her life that it was fine? Like, how did that go?
well, we had a very interesting conversation one night, and I'm like standing outside, and it's not a cloud in the sky, and the moon's out. It's one of the few memories of like real clarity in my past. Uh, I don't know why I have a hard time making them, but this is definitely one of them where I'm like, okay, so it's that question, like, do you even believe the Bible? And like,
Yeah.
I legit start from like Genesis and start like just telling the story and making it all the way to Jesus. And so it was definitely it was a very interesting conversation. Obviously it turned out well. I mean, we did get married, and I mean,
What was her reaction when you finally admitted out loud that maybe you weren't religious anymore? Was that like a
so that wasn't that long ago, um, to be quite frank.
interesting?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I mean, so I'd say probably if the seeds of deconversion are planted, what was it, 04 to 08 is when I'm in seminary. It's sort of doesn't start really percolating until um, God, probably right before COVID.
Really?
Oh yeah, very, very
So,
recently.
if seminary was when the seed was planted, what happened right before COVID that made you be like, "Yep,
So there's
that's wild."
you have like the little movements, right? Of just like so maybe like I said, the movement from okay, women can be pastors, like that's a move in a more liberal direction.
Mhm.
I felt like I was like being super liberal by saying like um, you know maybe being gay is not a sin, but we should still be celibate, kind of thing. But it's not like just, I mean, this can just be biological, so that's not a sin, right? So, but it's like how we behave. So, oh God. Um,
Wow.
but then like a buddy of mine from seminary, he had a great phrase that stuck with me. Uh, Plausibility structures. Right. In order for any belief to be held, it has to be plausible, right? And in order for plausibility to be, there has to be the structures around which those beliefs can hang, right? And so, you know, to to put a more you know potentially cynical way of putting it is like the people you hang around with they're gonna affect you. Um, you know, oh, it's like I don't know if you had this visual analogy growing up, in youth group, but you're at the youth group meeting, and somebody brings a chair over and it says, who wants to stand on this chair? All right. So you got the person standing on this chair. This person's they're a good Christian, and they're trying to reach the world for Jesus. And then, all right, who wants to be the sinner, right? Okay, so somebody comes, stands right next to them on the ground, right? And okay, hold hands, right? And pull. Who is, can you pull this person up onto the chair with you? Or is this person going to pull you down off the chair? And of course, it's just basic physics, right?
Right. Right.
The person falls off the chair every
Right.
single time.
Right.
And it proves the point that they want to prove, that like, look, the
Right.
people you hang around, if you hang around with sinful people, you're going to become a sinful person, and you're going to like not follow Jesus. And so you got to, watch out who you spend time with. And, you need to have non-Christian friends because they need to know Jesus, but, don't get too close to them. Right. Like, cause they're dangerous.
Right.
So you want to see them as a project, but you definitely don't want to see them as real human beings.
No, definitely not.
No, that was reading between the lines. The youth pastor would never say that part out loud. But it's true, right? That the only way, unless you have a very hard time mentalizing other people or actually caring what other people think, which sort of puts you at least on the spectrum of sociopathy, is that like we believe what we believe in large measure because those around us make it possible to believe it.
Yeah.
Yep. And so if
they facilitate that belief.
Right. And so if you have some people in your life that are meaningful to you, and kind of come at things from a different perspective than you, it allows you to like sort of open up a little bit to the possibility that those things might also be true. Right. And so there was at least one other person, a friend I got to know from the church that we were going to here in Maine, who he definitely grew up in a very fundamentalist tradition, but then went to an Ivy League seminary,
Wow.
for his master's, and so was coming at things from a more the theologically liberal tradition than I was. And so like I know his devotion and I know mine, and so having these conversations, and of course we're somewhat kindred spirits in just kind of the way we think about things and critical thinking and all that sort of stuff. And so we, when the door gets open to be like, maybe I can reconsider my position on this, and maybe there's a different way of understanding the Bible in this particular regard, then it allows for growth, it allows for change, and especially I've hopefully made it pretty clear that even though my identity was Christian, I didn't like hold any particular interpretation of Christianity as my identity, right? And so like I've never had a problem changing what I've believed based on evidence, right?
Well, as a parent, what do you tell your kids now? Because they're old enough, they're not like little kids.
Yeah.
Because I'm guessing the first part of their life they were in church and taught about God. So do they know anything about your deconversion, or have you ever had that conversation? Or
I'm glad you asked the question, because not yet. It has probably, at least for myself and kind of just my own, like admitting to myself of like where I actually stand, has been maybe about a year. And admitting where I stand uh, to Becky is maybe 8 months, right? And that, I mean, I'll be honest, like, I mean, that is it's a pain point right now.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is her story to tell as well, but how, like, when something that is like so central to like your understanding of our relationship is now
Mhm.
changed. um that's a
That's
hard thing to
huge.
work through.
That's
and
huge.
and
Yeah.
I would be lying to say that um we're anywhere near figuring that out. I mean, quite honestly, I mean, even just, this having this conversation here today was difficult, only in the sense of like, I'm just like in my own head doing my own thing, and then like not even considering like how um, having this conversation on the internet would affect anyone else, her,
Mhm.
kids, right? Because our oldest is 14, our youngest is just turned a year. And I mean, she's not wrong. I didn't, right? I mean, and that's on me. I mean, that's 100% on me. Um, but yeah, so like, the kids, it's I'm probably lying to myself to say that they don't know,
Mhm.
right? Because kids are really smart, right?
Yeah.
You know, we've been hit or miss on church for a long time, right? And that's not just that's not just me. Um,
Right. Yeah,
it's
like, my mom is a devout Christian, and I cannot remember the last time I saw that lady in a church.
Yeah,
Like,
right.
it just doesn't
And
happen.
yeah, and you know, and Becky's she's on her own spiritual journey, but is certainly not what one would call a conservative Christian. Um, uh, she is very spiritual. Um,
Would
and
you call yourself an atheist? Are you there yet?
so that's an interesting question. I think at this point in my life, it's funny. I'm like, I've been eschewing any kind of like labeling. 'Cause I'm like,
Yeah.
don't
There's
put a
no
label on
point.
me.
Yeah.
Um, but at the same point, I think functionally, you have to say like, do I believe that there's a God? I my own understanding right now is I've not seen the evidence for it.
Right.
Um,
So
you
you're
know,
at least agnostic then, if you had to pick a label. Maybe not atheist, but agnostic.
yeah, I mean, in some respect, that is true. I think there's another respect in which um, the claims that at least Christianity makes, in order to be true for me, um, I've would have a very hard time believing right now.
Right. Yeah.
Um, but here's and it's funny, because it was, I think, just a couple of weeks ago, Becky asked me a question, and it really stuck with me. Because we were talking about this, and she's like, "Well, do you think you ever really believed at all, or had faith at all? Um, because if it's all about evidence, then is it about faith?" And that sort of that stopped me in my tracks, because I'm like, that is a really good question.
The opposite of faith is needing evidence.
Because if I believe this because of of the evidence I have in a particular interpretation of the Bible, if I believe this based on the evidence I have from personal experience, and God, see, this is why, like, I mean, even though we're not on the same page, like, she just asked these insightful questions that make me just like sort of like, whoa, you gotta actually think about that, because I don't know. I mean, I could say I believed based on evidence, but is that faith?
Well, as somebody who would have said the same thing, I cannot recall any evidence. I've tried. I've really tried. And I cannot recall any actual evidence.
I mean, I can recall things that I felt like were sufficient evidence at the
Exactly.
time, right?
Exactly. At the time, it seemed like sufficient evidence, but the researcher, debater, fact
Mhm.
checker, current day me is like, that would not, as an adult, that would not count in my book as evidence, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. So, like, I kinda hinted at it, but back in college, senior year, I'm trying to figure out, or the summer before my senior year, I'm trying to figure out, like, what am I supposed to be doing at, with my life post-graduation,
Mhm.
um, and that summer, it was probably the best summer job I've ever had in my life. I was a trip leader at a camp in New Hampshire, and so, like, my job all summer was just to hike, and the kids came along, but they had their own counselors. Like, I wasn't a counselor. I planned the trips, I led the trips.
Hmm.
The counselors would, like, take care of the kids, and I would absolutely, like, interact with them and have a fun time. But, like, when it came time to, like, kids, you got to be quiet and go to sleep, or kids are having a hard time, like, listen to that guy, right? Um, and so I mean, I'm hundreds of miles over that summer just hiking the White Mountains in New Hampshire. It was just amazing. But I was on a mountaintop at daybreak, and this was on Acadia National Park. It's on the coast of Maine, on an island, and it's supposedly at some points of the year like the first place on the eastern United States that sees the sun when it comes up, right? And I'm just like, I'm sitting there. It's dark, right? We've got everyone there, and we're there to watch the sunrise, right? It's a thing that people do. And like, I'm watching the sunrise, and like, I'm just I got a bit of that musician artist thing in me, and I'm like doing the poetry thing in my head of like, it's completely black, and then like the sun starts to hit the horizon, and it's super like foggy, and so it's just like it's the chaos before God said, in the beginning, uh, you know, uh, uh, when the earth was formless and void, right? And the sun comes up and it starts revealing more, and I just get this voice in my head. What is a year of your life in the grand scheme of things? Like, literally, it was probably like the clearest I've ever heard a voice in my head, right? And I very much took it as that was God speaking to me, right?
Mhm.
Like, yeah, what is it like? So what did that mean? I was like, I'm going to do this crusade thing. Try working with them for a year and just see, if it's a year, and I don't ultimately end up doing it, then what was a year, right? But if it does end up, then what was a year, right? Um, and now I'm just like, well, I mean, that's just my own thoughts.
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
like just plain and simple. Like,
If you could snap your fingers and either A, very much believe again, like wake up tomorrow and you're right in the middle of belief, or B, be more solidified and strengthened in your resolve that you are not religious and that there isn't a God, what would you do? In both
uh,
scenarios, there is no additional evidence that God is real.
yeah, 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 yeah. Classic red pill, blue pill. Uh, there's a part of me that says it would be so much easier to believe again. It would make my marriage easier. It would make my parenting easier. It would make other relationships like it would. It's all about relationship, really. It would make it easier because that shared foundation would be back again. But on the other side, it's funny because you say, be more like firm in your resolve, and I'm like, I think maybe I'm just like hedging because I'm like, I'm not sure I could get more resolved. I mean,
Oh,
like,
good.
yeah,
I didn't realize that. I thought you were still like up in
no,
the air.
and maybe it's just a matter of, it's fresh and almost, you have those things where like, they're true about you, but you just like, you don't want to say it out loud, because then that means it's not just in your head, but it's out in the real world. And
Right. Speak it into existence.
right, I'm manifesting my unbelief. But so it's like, I, from both, not only like, just kind of that slow sort of walk away from, well, this particular interpretation of the Bible is correct. To the very, I think I think I sort of like tongue in cheek kind of said it was, one of the major turning points was aliens. Um, but I mean, what I meant by that was the I think regardless of sort of what particular flavor of Christianity you ascribe to, the end result is that God is with God's people, and and the earth is made whole and new. The the effects of the fall into sin have been reversed, and we're here on this earth and everything's perfect, right, for eternity. And then I'm just like, well, I mean, rationally, what does that mean? Okay, so entropy has to stop. All right, so physics as we know it has to cease. All right, so the entire mechanism of the universe has to change. All right, that's fine if we are the only intelligent, and here I'm going to very much air quote this, intelligent species in the universe, and that's just mathematically impossible, right? Unless, again, unless that's just the way God made it, and for however infinitesimally minute the probabilities are, that doesn't mean it's not true, right? They're probabilities.
Right.
So, all that, but what that means is, okay, so if we're not the only like, speed, like, intelligence, just not the right way to put it. Chosen,
Sentient.
yeah, there you go, sentient species, right? Like if there are other, and again, what is sentience really? If there are other species like us in the universe, okay, we now have another problem. So not only if things stop for us, I mean, potentially maybe God's doing the same thing on another planet, right? Okay.
Right. Like why would we be the first and only one? Why wouldn't we be like the 10th version?
Right. Exactly. Okay. So, but what is that? If what do we believe about God? Orthodox Christianity says that, that it's the Trinity, right? Father, Son, Holy Spirit. All right. And Orthodox Christianity also says that Son, Jesus, is now subsequent to his life on earth, the God man, right? Is forever human and divine. Okay. What about with other species, right? Like on other planets, there are other, like, sentient life out there. Like either they haven't sinned or, we don't have the whole story. And maybe that's
Or
true. Maybe we don't have the whole story, right? Um,
or maybe their version has already been raptured and we're the test he's trying again because it failed the first, second, third, fourth, fifth time.
right. But what does that do? Like, I guess part of my thing was I always want to like understand the story as like, if it's going to be true, then Jesus as God and human has to be true, right? And has to be true for eternity. And what does that do for, non-human Earth species? Potentially, there is a way of making the story work that then begs the next question is, why can't we reinterpret or have new quote unquote revelation that gives us now a modern religion, a modern spiritual understanding, right?
I've been saying that. I've been like, if there's an Old Testament and a New Testament, why can't there be a third one? Why can't there be a modern one that tells us modern issues, modern problems, modern commandments? That would make sense, right? Like
Right.
you would think for sure that there would be rules against internet usage and stuff like that.
Yeah. And even like, yeah, because it understanding like how how the Bible came to be is a whole thing in and of itself. But part of it is just a large enough groundswell of people saying not only that, but this in regards to religious writings, right? We're going to take these texts as authoritative for our belief structures. And there are other ones, and there's always been this thing where like there are other texts that are out there that would get used, in kind of edifying sort of ways, but they weren't scripture, right? They weren't inspired. So anytime a pastor like quotes a theologian or a popular writer or something like that, it's the same kind of thing, but it's not on the same level, right? It's not offering a new authoritative belief. Now, some traditions are more open to God continuing to speak than others. I will fully admit that I kind of sort of come from the angle that says the canon is closed. There's no more, like, we have everything that we need. But we don't, right? Like, I mean, we've obviously humans have figured out ways to sort of reinterpret things, right?
Yeah.
We can say things like, okay, the Genesis 1, that's a poem, that's not science, right? You have the light being created on day 1 and the sun, moon, and stars on day 4. Oh, well, yeah, no, it definitely, you have form and filling, you've got okay, all right, so maybe you know maybe Jericho didn't really happen because the walls are still there. Okay.
I didn't think about that. That's a really good point. That's actually really funny. Sorry. That's gonna sit rent free in my mind for a while.
you know, um, let's just think scientifically about a global flood and what that would actually mean. We've, at least in particular, streams of Christianity, have allowed at least for some wiggle room in interpretation, right? But not in adding anything new. And like, and it just, when when we keep understanding and finding out new things about reality and how things are, say in science, or even in more kind of soft, not, I hate the hard soft science distinction, but it works with, like, so whether it's the fact that we now know things like quantum physics, we didn't know that 100 years ago, right? Or say in psychoanalytic theories, right, and understanding, maybe not biologically how the mind works, but have models of mind that make sense of what it means to be a human, that don't require a spirit, quote unquote, right? It's like, if we're going to be spiritual, then we need to have a spirituality. And I say we need, it's presumptuous, but I would need to have a spirituality that wasn't just like of the gaps, but was able to incorporate all of what we know now, right? Like, instead of just thousands-year-old stories, it's even just something as small, and it's not necessarily small per se, but just the fact that, the probabilistic nature of quantum physics says you can have something come from nothing, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that's how the universe came into being, but if the probability, like, if and it's been actually observed that particles can come into being where they weren't before. Now, on the whole, they don't last, but again, all you need is probability, right? So,
And a little bit of faith.
and a little bit of faith.
I'm just
I mean, what I mean, in some sense, you're not wrong about it, because every story we tell, in a sense, is an interpretive story, right? Because all we can put data in front of us, but the making sense of the data, putting meaning onto or pulling out of, anytime you get into meaning, or what does this data mean, we're now telling a story about it. And any story is perspectival, right? Like, I tell a story about a set of events because of my perspective on it. You tell your story about a set of data because the way in which you look at it,
So from your perspective, if somebody is watching this and they're like, I don't think I'm religious anymore. It used to be a huge part of my life, but I simply don't believe it. It's not that I hate it. It's not that I want to disrespect it. I simply don't believe it. What would you say? Like, what would be your story?
My story would be, you have to be honest with yourself. Because if, like, I kind of fought against the where I was, finding myself for quite a while, because I was just unwilling to sort of say it. I mean, for a bit, with a buddy of mine, I'm like, well, it's funny. We sort of, people are always talking about being, spiritual but not religious. I'm like, I feel like I'm religious but not spiritual.
That's funny.
But if you're struggling with it, it doesn't mean, like, you just be like, oh, well, I just have to, like, give into it. But at least say it out loud.
Mm-hmm.
like even I've done here tonight,
Yeah.
some things I'm like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a thing that I guess I was really thinking and feeling and wasn't necessarily didn't feel right to say I was so dogmatic about this, but I guess kind of I am. Because like we we can't live like in the cognitive dissonance, right?
Mm-mm.
There it, it will um it will it will take up space in your mental and emotional, it will consume space and will affect every single part of your life.
And the other 5% energy you have left will be faking it.
Right,
It expends everything.
and 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 ultimately, like we have to say, like, for whom am I faking it? Right.
Exactly.
So like in my particular case, I'm faking it for the sake of my relationship with Becky for a while. I'm faking it. I guess technically still kind of faking it now with my kids because I haven't had that conversation with them yet. I think there's wisdom in how
Oh, yeah.
you have those conversations, and especially like if you're not entirely sure how to voice what you're feeling at the moment, um maybe find a safe place where you can talk out loud. Even I guess, I mean, depending on your personality, just talk out loud to yourself and see what it
Mhm.
sounds like.
Record it
um
on your phone memos and play it back to yourself.
right, and then maybe you'll be like, ooh, no, that's not really, and or
Or
yeah,
you'll just be like, "That's what I sound like?" That's what
right.
I do when I record myself.
I I'd be lying if I said, am I really going to listen to this? Because my recorded voice does not sound like the voice in my head.
Well, sometimes just getting it out there the first time, never having to listen to it again is half the battle.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Because when
It's like burying a
you
time capsule.
yeah, when you put it out there, you've now acknowledged it. And and it, for some things, it's I see you. I recognize that you're there. I acknowledge your presence. I'm not ready or have the space and time to address you in the way that you need to be addressed, right? And I'm talking about like yourself, your self
The
concept,
ideas,
your
yeah.
belief, because you can only say, okay, that's a thing, but I can't let it, for whatever reason right now, consume me.
Yeah.
But if you acknowledge and put it on the shelf, you at
Yeah.
least have a thing of it.
Yeah.
So I mean,
Acknowledge it, make it a thing, put it out in the universe, however you feel best suits you, whether you mail yourself a letter, whether you record it on your phone and don't listen to it. Um, yeah, I think that's a great first step because I didn't know until now that you were so recent in your journey, but it also sounds like you waited to solidify your thoughts and feelings and really call it what it is until after you knew for a fact that's where you stood. It doesn't seem like it was a rash decision. It seems like it was more it became the truth and you had to kind of own up to it and you had to kind of and
yeah,
I appreciate you sharing that with my podcast. I really appreciate that because people who've never been in it, they don't understand one, how difficult it is to get out. Two, a lot of times there's like a mourning process involved.
oh, very
You're
much.
putting to death a former version of yourself. You're putting to death these ideas for how you saw your future going. You're putting to death the idea that you're going to see your loved ones in heaven, there's all these years
Mhm.
you've spent worrying about things like hell that you recognize like now you don't even think is real. There's a true mourning process because people think whenever you deconvert or deconstruct that it's like woo party I can go do all the secular stuff I always wanted to and that's not it at all. It's more like you have to sit with yourself and the idea that everything you dedicated your life to and you stood behind and you had faith in doesn't exist
Yeah.
and it's traumatic to be frank.
It
especially when you consider the impact it has on kids and marriages and the way that you've raised your family if you have one.
Yeah. You're not wrong about that, Sydney. It is very, I think traumatic is the right
Truly.
way to say it, because
It's like finding out your biological parent wasn't your parent like your whole life,
yeah,
you know?
yeah, I know. In some respect, when I hear, say, like, some of your guests who are younger, they would, yeah, I deconverted in my 20s. God, I kind of wish, right? Like,
Yeah.
not because I don't value, the life experience I've had in the intervening time, um or like I feel like I've lost, like, oh my God, I've devoted, what I've devoted my life to was a waste. Because I don't feel that at all. Potentially because, at least in my own particular case, I'm like, I just want people to feel more like that they're valuable, that they belong.
Mhm.
It was never really about any particular dogmatic assertions, as much as you're loved, you're cared for, you're welcome.
Mhm.
Um, but the further along you get, I mean, I'm in my early 40s. There's a lot of things that are, like, the roots are very deep and very intertwined,
Yep. And
and yeah,
it's like a sunk cost fallacy. Part of you is like, I've already put 30 years, 40 years into this. Why bother? Like, what was so bad about it that I need to stop now? But then the other part of you is like, I don't want to put 43 years into this. Like, you know what I mean? So
yeah,
it's a toss up. It
it
really is.
is, yeah, because, like,
Especially when you do things like you did at the top of the episode where you're like, "My experience wasn't so bad. I didn't really have it as tough as some of your guests." When you do that thing to yourself where you're like, "It wasn't that bad." Like, it really wasn't, but it was. Because if it wasn't, you wouldn't be feeling the way that you feel about it right now.
yeah,
And by bad, I don't necessarily mean like God is bad or Jesus is
no,
bad or anything
no,
like
no,
that.
no.
Religion can be bad.
Yeah,
Religious beliefs can be bad. Dogma can be bad. Like
right,
those sorts of things.
yeah, absolutely, and
So it's
and I
easy
feel,
to say you didn't have it as bad, but maybe you did.
right, and this just came, I going back to, what would I say to the person? I don't know about anybody else, but I am struggling a lot with feeling like I've let everyone around me down. Right. Like, I know, like, the reality of it is just like, you have to be true to yourself and whatever, but, like, I
You
mean,
would be letting them down more if you lied to them for the
right,
next 20 years.
right. And that's a hard thing to say, though, because it's like, okay, it's one thing to hold something, say, from Becky, because I'm like, if you have a spouse, if you've got a partner, if you're doing life with someone, regardless of whatever legal or otherwise arrangement it may be, like, you have to be honest, because vulnerability is the only way to do a relationship, right?
Mhm.
um but then it's like, I mean, what do you say to people like your parents, right? Like, I mean, my parents were really young. Like, they're only 20 years older than I am, right? Like, they're not old.
Do you know what you do? I've got an answer for you.
What's that?
You start a podcast because they don't listen to podcasts.
Oh, God.
They don't listen. They have no idea. They have no clue.
I wish that was true. But my mom she's she's a professor in nursing now. It was a late in life kind of thing, and so she consumes stuff. So in some respect, I was like, maybe, because, quite honestly, like, this is I'm doing this before I'm telling even people that are close to me, because in some respect, like, this is sort of anonymous because nobody,
Right.
eh,
Yeah.
unless, there are other people in my circles who are doing the same thing, who are just being quiet about it, and they're like, "Hey, I heard you on Growing Up Funny." I'm like, "Oh my god, you fucking listen to that too? That's great. Let's talk."
Not to scare you, but that has happened to me more than once. Where people are
Is
like, "Wait, holy shit. I know who you look. I listen to that podcast. That's you?" Yeah.
That's amazing. I love
Yeah, I
that.
teach stand-up comedy classes, and I've had more than one stand-up student be like, "Wait a second,"
Wait, I
because they
know
don't
that
see me, they
voice.
just hear me. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, but yeah, no, it people are going to have unpleasant emotions. That's how I'll
Yes.
put it.
Yes.
Unpleasant emotions based off of the where you are finding yourself in life.
Yes.
Um, I say unpleasant, not good or bad, because hard feelings can be good,
Mhm.
but unpleasant, and and I think in some respect there has to be a calculus on um, the cost benefit, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you don't talk to this person a lot, maybe they don't necessarily take the space in your life to do that.
Yeah.
If you only see your parents a couple of times a year, and you know they're not really prying about things, then you can just kind of let it be. But maybe you find yourself in a position, then you end up saying something you weren't planning on, and then you have to have a good conversation, even if it's hard.
True. But it's good. But
I
it's a
think,
good conversation.
yeah.
And it shows you a lot about your boundaries. People will always have a negative reaction to you setting a boundary. Always. Not everyone, but the people who
Right.
do have negative reactions, they'll have negative reactions no matter what type of boundary you set.
Hmm.
And so I think it tells you a lot about who you surround yourself with, how they react, how they respond. Some people might say, I need to think about it. Some people might say, well, if you this, then insert punishment here,
Hmm.
right? And honestly, thin that herd.
Yeah.
Or something else that might really surprise you is when you finally, quote unquote, come out as not believing anymore, you will be shocked at the number of people around you who have secretly been doing the same thing. And now you have something you can talk about. The number of DMs I get from people I went to high school with who are like, hey, like, I just want you to know I listened to your podcast and like, I agree, but like, don't tell anyone. Like, it's it's astronomical how many people will pick up on that. It's like a radar. It's like deconstructed people know each other when we see each other. It's like a smell.
I think you're absolutely right about that, because
Yeah.
you're like, that turn of phrase, I know that. I've used that one to sort of say enough to make someone thinks one thing, but
Yep.
actually I can convince myself I actually meant the opposite of.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think even though there's the risk of losing people, I think you will find that you will gain so many more people. Gain. I've never had better friends than after deconstructing, and they've all deconstructed, and they are not horrible, evil people.
No.
Maybe they're going to hell. I don't think so, but maybe. Some people might think so. But
That was at
so
least, in my process, the hell thing went pretty quickly. And I was like, oh, yeah, I could get behind annihilationism. So, at the very least, maybe we just cease to
yeah.
exist.
So what I would like to say, because I'm trying to be respectful of your time. I realize I kept you like an hour and 10 minutes longer than I said I would.
I told you I would be a talker, and I could keep going, but I also
What
recognize your time
what
as
I
well.
what I think would be cool is periodically throughout your journey to come check back in. So maybe
Sure.
like 6 or 8 months from now, or whenever you feel like a big shift, you can come back on and like touch base and tell us like, how does it feel? How's it going? How did people react? Who have you told? How has it impacted you? Et cetera, et cetera. And then maybe a few months after that, check back in. Maybe it's a year, however long it takes you to feel like you're leveling,
Yeah.
I think it'd be cool if you're interested. That I would like to put that offer out there.
I appreciate that. I think there could be some value to it, to be sure. Not least of which it gives me an opportunity to. It's interesting. I'm sorry, I'm rabbit trailing a little bit, but and I don't know if you find this to be true for yourself. Say when you're trying to come up with material for an act, is that like I used to do a lot of like processing because
Mhm,
say like preaching or
mhm.
out, like telling stories and so it was like always kind of in the back of my head, like, oh, this and that, and kind of making those. And then like when you stop, it's just like, oh, I'm just sort of existing and I'm not like um I'm not sort of what's the word? Um oh, I'm so sorry.
No, you're good. Is it vibing, perhaps?
Nope, it's not fusion. It's, oh God.
Osmosis?
It'll come to me in a couple of minutes and I'll be like, that's the one.
You'll wake up at
Um,
like 3 a.m. and be like, damn
God,
it.
I do that so many times. It's just like, that's what I was going for, but it's synthesizing. There we go.
There it is.
I knew it would come. Yeah. That, that I think the, the process is, it can be lonely.
Mhm.
But I think even, part of the reason why I, filled out the form was just like, if I feel alone, it means somebody else is like me.
Yep.
Right.
Yes.
Because again, going to probabilities, there's a very small chance that I'm the only, person in his early 40s with a family who, believes differently going through this process.
Totally.
So,
Totally. And people are
um,
gonna listen to this and they're gonna feel personally attacked, called out, you know, signaled, and then maybe in a month or 2, they'll start to explore that about themselves as well, right? Like, who even just one person seeing themselves in that story, I think that's really helpful. I think it's a story a
yeah.
lot of people can relate to, even if the details are a little bit different, like maybe they didn't go to seminary, something like that. Um, yeah, I absolutely think your story is valuable, and I think your journey in the future is also very valuable. For sure.
Thanks.
No problem. No
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah. It's funny. It's just like, as a white male, there are a few times when, I've run into the representation matters.
No, but it does though. It really does.
It
Listen,
so
from
does.
one redhead to the other, there needs to be more of us out here
Yeah.
spreading. Listen,
Yes.
listen,
Yes.
I'm telling you, I can wipe these off and we'll have matching eyebrows. Like these are drawn on, these are manufactured, like redhead to the core. But
That's really funny because Becky's always like, we could fill your eyebrows in. I'm like, and
I can
it's
send you
just,
the products. I got a list.
well,
If
and she's, like I said, cosmetologist, hair and makeup, and just fucking brilliant at what she does. And so like, every so often we'll put it in and they are perfect. But I'm like, my face looks weird.
yeah, it makes you want to like
I'm like, oh yeah, yeah. I'm like, oh wait, what? Like I have a definition between my eyes and my forehead.
it like reframes your whole face. Yeah. But
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Oh,
well,
I know you want to end this, but I just had an interesting idea, and you can like kind of edit this into whatever location you want this to be in. Speaking about the representation thing, I thought it was really. Did you ever watch the show on Hulu, Rami?
no, I didn't.
Okay, it's fantastic. You should watch.
Rami. Okay.
Yeah, Rami. He's a stand-up comedian who got a like a, it's not a sitcom, it's one of those dramedy sort of things.
Hmm.
It's really really good, but he's Muslim, right? But it it's the story that I feel like Christian filmmakers should have been able to make, because he's trying to be a good Muslim and shit just happens around him. And like, he's got friends that are like, you know, they're like, oh, go to prayers, do this, do that. And then is, off kind of just doing their own thing. But he's like, no, I really want to take this seriously. And they're like looking at him weird and like, just like do your thing, but, but it was one of those, like, why am I feeling seen more in this actually was kind of part of the whole sort of deconversion process. Because I got to a place of more like universalist before I sort of left the camp altogether. Of just like, I'm identifying with this spirituality, or at least this way of trying to live out a spirituality in the world, that's being portrayed here, Islamic faith, and anything I've seen in the media on, of like Christian whatever,
because they don't want to portray that aspect of it. They want that to be like, that doesn't exist in Christianity. That doesn't exist. People don't feel that way.
The guy who, is like, just he's trying really hard, but he's sleeping with these with these girls every so often. And it's just like, but then like legitimately, and not in like a fake sort of way, and it may just speak to his ability as an actor, but just like struggling with like, this is who I am, but this is who I want. And anyway, it's just it's a really, really good show.
I can actually link it in the description. I'll do that.
Hey, there you go.
It's on Hulu.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a really fantastic conversation. I really appreciate you sitting here and sharing your story, especially finding out how recent this is for you. And for anybody listening, if you heard this story and you see yourself, or you hear yourself, or maybe something similar, maybe you find it relatable, let us know. Comment. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can leave a comment. I think you can leave a comment on Spotify. I'm pretty sure. Email us in. My email's in the link below. I'll send Graham anything that you send me about his episode. And we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear what you agree with, what you disagree with, what you relate to, questions that you have, anything at all. If you find yourself on a similar journey, or you hope to one day be where Graham is at this point. And yeah, let us know. Send it in. I'd love to send them his way and have him maybe come back and answer some of the questions, or you can submit the answers via email too if you want to. But
hey, I'm always down for a little Q&A.
Yeah. But it's been really fantastic talking to you and getting to hear your story from your perspective. And thank you so much for sharing that with us. I know that it's not an easy process and it's not an easy journey, but I'm honored to debut your story.
Oh, thank you very much. I am very appreciative of your time and this opportunity.